Good evening, everyone. I am Tracy Brown, Tippecanoe County GOP Chair, and I want to welcome you to our candidate debate this evening, featuring candidates from House District 41 up first, and then Senate District 23. We are broadcasting live from Thomas Duncan Hall, the beautiful Thomas Duncan Hall in Lafayette, Indiana. Thank you to the folks for having us in this evening. Julie Pope and her assistant Carol worked very hard to prepare the facility for us, and we certainly appreciate that. Again, we are broadcasting live on our Facebook channel and also on YouTube. And I want to introduce a few people here before I turn the program over. Jody Hamilton, our GOP chair, is, I think, seated to my immediate right. Thank you for being here tonight. Steve Klink, Steve Klink is in the house. You can't see him right now. If you've ever watched the movie, most of you have, The Wizard of Oz, the wizard is behind the curtain pulling the levers and making things happen, and that's what Steve Klink has been doing all day long. A monumental task to set this facility up in the manner that it has been set up to be able to broadcast and stream to all the folks out there across the community. Also want to thank B. Smith and Vicki Birch, who are our timers this evening, representing the Republican Women's Club. They are co-hosting the event tonight, and our panelist, who so graciously volunteered to be involved in the process. Our candidates as well. It has been a very busy pre-primary season, if you will. I know they have been out doing a lot, and this is probably one of the few nights that they've had off where they're not out knocking on doors and putting up signs, so it means a lot for us to have them with us tonight. A couple of housekeeping notes. In the event that we have an emergency, obviously we are going to leave the same way we came in, through the front door, back out to Ferry Street. If you are given other instructions, if something were to happen that caused us to shelter in place, I'll be giving additional instructions as to where that would be. Also, the restrooms, if you didn't find them when you first came into the building, if you go back towards the main foyer before you get to the stairs, you can either go to the right or the left and follow the signage, and you'll find two restrooms there. Please watch the cables as you're moving about tonight. There are a lot of those that are taped down to the floor everywhere, and those cables keep us live, so watch for those. And I want to turn the program over to someone who is not a stranger to any of us, Gina Quattrocchi, a longtime member of staff at WLFI, local broadcast journalist, who has so graciously agreed to come and be our moderator this evening. So I'm going to turn things over to her. Gina?
Thank you. Tracy, thank you. Good evening. As Tracy said, my name is Gina Quattrocchi. Very happy to be with you this evening at the Tippecanoe County GOP Live Indiana Statehouse candidate debate for House District 41 and Senate District 23. I want to go over a few things first so everybody at home knows what our format is this evening. Each candidate will be given 1 minute to introduce themselves. A timekeeper will display a green card at the beginning of the candidate's introductory comments. A yellow card will be displayed with 15 seconds remaining, and a red card will be displayed when time has expired. In the first round of questions, question number 1 will be presented to candidate number 1. In the following rounds, questions will be presented to the next candidate as established in order from left to right, your left to right. The candidate answering the question first will be given 1.5 minutes to respond to the question. In order, the remaining candidates will be given an opportunity to respond to the same question, and they will have 1 minute. Our volunteer panelists prepared their questions prior to tonight's event, but the list of questions may be modified during the event at the sole discretion of the panel. No member of the Tippecanoe County Republican Central Committee participated in the development of the questions. The total number of rounds of questions obviously depends on time remaining in each session. Candidates will be given an opportunity to make closing remarks. Remarks by candidates will be limited to no more than 2 minutes. Candidates should be respectful of the time restrictions placed on the introduction periods established to answer the questions. Any rebuttal to comments from a candidate answering should be contained in your own answer. I'd like to take a moment to introduce our panelists this evening. We have Mr. Jeff Smith from WLFI, Emilie Syberg, a panelist, also tonight with us from WBAA Radio, and in the middle, Dave Bangert, a panelist based in Lafayette on Substack. So let's begin now with our introductions. We will start left to right. Indiana House District 41, introduction, Mr. Richard Bagsby.
Thank you, Gina. My name is Richard Bagsby. I am very grateful to be able to be at least at the table. I am a construction managing superintendent as far as my trade goes. I am a father of 8. I have 2 grandchildren on the way. I am very inspired, to say the least, especially the last couple of years, as far as where I've seen Indiana go and where our supermajority has taken us, and I believe that I can contribute to our issues at hand. I believe I am a father that has been affected by the issues, especially in our school systems, and this is why I'm running. Thank you.
Thank you. Next introduction from Mr. Mark Genda.
Yes, good evening. Thank you for having us here this evening. My name is Mark Genda. I was born and raised in Frankfort, Indiana, and I am running for the District 41 seat to be a representative of the people. And that has been my fundamental basis for me getting into this race. Been a business owner for 30 years. And in that 30-year time, I feel like I've gained some experience along with my 59.5 years here on earth. But I've been a licensed funeral director for 38 years, and in that time, my sole profession has been people forward, and that is why I consider myself a good candidate for this position, and for that reason, thank you.
Thank you. Our next introduction, Mr. Shane Weist.
Hi, my name is Shane Weist. I'm a lifelong resident of Tippecanoe County, a graduate of Central Catholic in Purdue. I spent 15 years as the head golf professional at Coyote Crossing and Battleground Golf Club, and ever since I've been the sales manager at Tempest Homes. I've been very active in this community my entire life. I've served on over 20 nonprofit boards and committees. I spent 5 years as chairman of the Fairfield Township Board, and I've spent 15 years managing companies, as I mentioned. I'm a pro-life, pro-liberty, pro-gun candidate. I'm very much for putting the rights in the hands of the people. I think people can make a lot better decisions for themselves than government ever can. And I would really appreciate your support for House District 41. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Our first question from our panel tonight goes to Mr. Richard Bagsby.
Why are you running now, and what would you like to accomplish in the Indiana House?
Thank you for the question. I was inspired to run. Like I said, I have 8 children, 5 in school, right now 3 adults. When the mic here, that's okay, I don't need a mic. So when the COVID pandemic happened, my wife and I were at a disbelief at how it was handled. Our children was mandated to wear a mask. We have 2 children who have speech impediments, and that severely affected them. And in our frustrations and going to school board meetings, after school board meetings, and arguing back and forth with them as far as getting an exemption for our children, we seen that our fight wasn't with them, and it was with the Statehouse and how things were handled, and that's why I'm running. I believe that I can contribute and put the people first by displaying what the Constitution, what it was written for, and what it means and stands for. So that's why I'm running.
Thank you. Mr. Genda?
As I said, it was December the 18th, and I was presented the opportunity. I was having a conversation with our local coroner, and he said, Mark, there's been a redistricting of District 41. And I was asked, who would be a good candidate? And he said, Mark Genda. And I smiled, and I said, well, thank you. And then the more I thought about it, and the more I researched it, I thought I would be a good candidate because of the fact of my people experience. I believe strongly that this position is about the people, not about the ideals, or it's people forward. That's why I'm running. I'm a people person, and I'm a communicator, and I believe that's what's missing.
Thank you. Mr. Weist, your question.
I'm running because I love serving people, my community, and my state. I have 3 young children, and I want to make sure that we're passing conservative, fiscally responsible policies that will lead to great opportunities for future generations to make sure that they can live the Hoosier dream just as we do. I want to make sure and protect our rights. I'm very anti-mandate. I want to make sure that the rights remain in the hands of the people and are not taken away by the government. Thank you.
Okay, panel, your next question. This starts with Mr. Genda.
There's several bills in the Statehouse that did not go through dealing with schools, and particularly about oversight of teachers and oversight of classroom instruction. Did those bills go too far? Did they not go far enough? Or were they just stunts? What do you think?
I flashed back immediately to my school board days because I had 2 terms on the Frankfurt School Board. And as I looked at this, and then I heard what I thought to be the most logical example of a way to move forward to answer that question. Representative Don Leahy, I thought, had his old school board hat on at a legislative breakfast the other day. He said, back in my time on the school board, we had the parents, the educators, and the administration sit down before every year and select the curriculum. And I thought, well, look at the logic of that. That would be something I would see as a very common sense approach to this, and maybe something to get us started on the right track.
Thank you. Mr. Weist?
I definitely think it's very important that we keep CRT out of our schools. I have a history degree from Purdue. I understand the importance of our history, remembering our history, and knowing our history so we do not repeat it. I do stand with our teachers. I want to make sure that we're not doing too much overreach into our classrooms, but I also do feel it's very important that our parents do have a say and are involved with our teachers. So I think it's about finding the right mix, making sure, like Mark said, that there's a lot of communication between the teachers and the parents, and coming up with a good solution that works well for everybody.
Thank you. Mr. Bagsby, your turn.
As a parent, I believe that parents' rights matter, and I don't believe that that was displayed very well, especially in our current situation. The bills that should have been passed, HB 1134, I believe that should have been passed. That protects the parents' rights. Now, I'm not against teachers by no means, but my children are not social experiments, and I don't believe that we should continue supporting social initiative programs such as critical race theory, social equity learning, 1619 project, and I believe we should keep pornography out of our schools. I think it's really cut and dry. I think it's simple. You know, my 8-year-old, we exempted her from the class on sexuality. Why? Because as a parent, I think that is my duty, my right to teach my child, particularly sexuality in school. Even with the Indiana Code 2030-5, Chapter 5, it even states that instruction on human sexuality or sexually transmitted diseases is to be taught in 12th grade. I don't know why my 8th grader has to learn that. So I hope that answers your question.
Thank you, sir. The panel will now direct its first question to Mr. Shane Weist.
Many candidates have indicated that abortion is one of their key issues. Earlier this month, the majority of Indiana's Republican lawmakers sent a letter to Governor Holcomb asking him to convene a special session if a U.S. Supreme Court ruling expected later this year expands states' ability to restrict abortion. So my question is, how far should Indiana go in restricting abortion?
I am definitely a pro-life candidate. I'm 100% against abortion for any circumstance. If that would happen with the U.S. Supreme Court, I would hope that the governor would call back our legislatures into a session to deal with that issue. I think life begins at conception, and with my Christian values, I believe that all lives matter, all lives are important, and we need to make sure that we're protecting the unborn.
Thank you. Mr. Bagsby, your question.
So I not only believe that life begins at conception, but actually we have an Indiana Code 16-34-2 1.1 that states that life begins at conception. And I think that the abortion, it's the right of every living person to protect life. Our Constitution says that we should protect life. If life begins at conception, even the unborn has the right to live. So I am strictly against abortion. And if Roe v. Wade is overturned, it should go back to the states. And I think our state, Indiana, I'm so passionate about that. I think Indiana should stand up for the unborn. So if you're asking me a straight, direct question, should abortion end? Yes, absolutely.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Genda, your question.
This is one of, when I've been out talking to the constituents of 41, this has been, if not their number one, it's their number two, and that is, where do you stand on life? And I am pro-life. And where I would take that even further is, I believe this. I believe that the Lord has put a soul into not only the unborn, but into all of us. And so where I would take this even one step further is where I go along the lines of assisted suicide. I think that needs to be addressed also in this question. And it seems to never be talked about. And I don't know why, because I'm absolutely against that also. That's the taking of a soul. That's the taking of a life. And I see no different. I am pro-life, period.
Thank you. Panel, your next question, Mr. Bagsby.
Would you support overriding Governor Holcomb's veto of the transgender athlete bill?
Absolutely. Would you
Yes.
like me to, sorry. Would you like me to expound on that?
You can expound, yeah.
Okay. So I would support overriding the veto because males should not compete against females in sports. I think it's an unfair advantage. I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a biologist, but I know just from growing up from knee-high to a grasshopper that a male has such an advantage over a female. And women, my mother, you know, she was a part of the women's rights movement. And to even think that this would be a discussion, whether a male should compete against a female, that's absolutely absurd. I don't even know why that's even a state, that shouldn't even be a state matter. It should be common sense. Women's rights, Title IX. If we can go back to the basics of what this really stands for, we wouldn't be dealing with such matters that have no business even on the table for discussion. Males should not compete with females. It's just that simple. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Genda.
I guess I already answered it. Pardon me, I didn't mean to jump on
I'm
you,
sorry.
Richard. No.
You know how I am.
Absolutely. I'm with Richard on this one. Why is this even being discussed, and why would this even be brought as a bill? The whole concept, it makes no logic to me at all. Men should not be competing in women's sports. That's that.
Thank you. Mr. Weist?
I absolutely agree as well. You are the sex that God biologically made you, and you should compete as that sex. There's no place for men and women's sports. You should be in the sport that you were designed to be a part of. And it's ridiculous to me that's even discussion at the Statehouse when we have much bigger issues we need to tackle. We could be spending time on education, infrastructure. This is not a bill we should even be on the table.
Thank you. Panel, your next question will be directed to Mr. Genda.
All three of you said some form of this bill should not even be considered right now. That was the point of IHSAA. Commissioner said we already have this in hand with transgender questions. Do you think that this was overstepping by the legislature? And how would you handle questions like that that come up where you actually say in your own head, why are we talking about this?
back to it. It was already addressed, and if not, then it should be addressed by the local school boards. That, again, if this would have come to us when I was on the school board, it would have, I don't even know that it would have made it to the table. It's just so far-fetched. So if if it was a situation that it came up, it should have been shut down at a local level and not ever brought to a state level.
Thank you. Mr. Weist?
Yeah, I know this currently isn't an issue that we're dealing with in the state of Indiana, probably an issue that's coming. But as you mentioned, the IHSA said it's already covered in their policies. I just think we get so caught up in social issues at the Statehouse anymore, and we're not actually putting focus on the issues that are important to our citizens, to our children, to our future. So I would, if I was serving the Statehouse and this issue came up, I would definitely fight to table it and ask to focus on the more important issues that are going to affect voters at home.
Thank you. Mr. Bagsby?
Can you ask your question again? I just want to make sure that I'm thoroughly understanding your question so that I can give you a proper response.
Sure. The point that you guys made just recently, or just a minute ago, was that this bill should not even be discussed. Mm-hmm. At least two of you did. Mm-hmm. What would you do when you say in your own head, as bills come forward, this really is not for us to discuss, yet a bill decides to take a life of its own, take on a life of its own? The question is, how would you handle that, and was that one of these situations here?
So SB 17, and I'm just going to pivot, I'm going to answer your question. SB 17 dealt with material harmful to minors. Pornography in our public libraries, sexuality being taught in school, not inducive to a parent's consent. This bill should have been heard. This bill should have been heard by our progressive Republicans. This bill was not heard because we are caught up on social experiments and they want to use our children for these experiments. This is a social matter where you have a male and you have a female. That, once again, it's absurd. Our priorities, when I say our, I would venture to say that we are all, should be conservative Republican. We are part of the Republican Party, but our priorities are mixed up. We focus more on whether a male and a female should be in the same sport rather than protecting our children from pornography. And that's the point that I'm making. That's why I say that's small potatoes compared to the seriousness of what we face as parents when it comes to our children, is the fact that SB 17 should have been heard, but it was put on the back burner while we are looking at, well, gee, should a male compete with, I'm sorry, I apologize.
Panel, your next question will be first directed to Mr. Weist.
Okay, a new state law allows the permitless carry of handguns in Indiana, and lawmakers emphasized that multiple other states have similar laws, made the argument that criminals wouldn't necessarily abide by the permitting system, but multiple members of law enforcement spoke out against the passage of this bill, including Indiana State Police Superintendent Doug Carter, former Lafayette Police Chief Patrick Flannelly, saying the permit system was a really important tool for them as frontline officers determining whether someone had a gun legally. So, directly, do you support the passage of this bill, and why or why not?
Yes, I 100% support the passage of constitutional carry. I think it's a right as an American citizen that we were given. It's currently passed in 21 states. In those states, they have not seen increased violence. The safest state in America, Maine, has had this bill in place for about 7 years. They have not seen increased violence in that state. I understand the concern of our law enforcement. I am all for our law enforcement. I've done events in the past to support our law enforcement, but I believe this isn't a law enforcement topic. I believe this is a constitutional right topic for our citizens and to protect themselves. We know criminals aren't following permit carry laws, so citizens should have the right to protect themselves in those situations. So yes, I'm supportive of the bill.
Thank you. Mr. Bagsby.
I do support the bill. I support it because we have the right to bear arms. It's really just that simple. We have inalienable rights given to us by God to protect ourselves, and our family. And I thank God that the state is recognizing that. I believe that is the state's duty to protect our rights as individuals. So I support it.
Thank you. Mr. Genda.
When I've been out to meeting the people of 41, here's what I'll share with you. That was the number 2 question. Where do you stand on the Second Amendment? And I will tell you this, the people of 41 that I have met and spoke with face to face believe in the passing of this bill. And then therefore, so would I. I do, but here's the thing. It's what the people of 41 that I've talked to, it's what they wanted to have happen, so I'm glad that it did.
Okay, panel, your next question will be first directed to Mr. Bagsby.
Do you believe that Joe Biden won the 2020 election for president in a fair and free election?
I was waiting on that question. Boy, that's a double-edged sword right there.
Yeah.
I am one of those that believe that Joe Biden, he is the president. He's the president of the United States. Was it fair and was it legit? Who's to say? So that's all I got.
Okay, thank you, sir. Mr. Genda.
Yes, Joe Biden is our president, and I don't think anybody in this room likes that fact, and I think we need to get it fixed in 3 years, but there's nothing I have nothing more to just comment on that question.
Thank you, Mr. Weist.
Yes, Joe Biden, is our president. Was it a fair election? It's probably only a question that could be answered by God. But we have to stand with him as a president, as much as I guess we don't like it, and hopefully we can, as Mark said, get that changed here in 3 years, because we've seen how quickly devastation can happen when a president is elected. But without having evidence in my hands, it's hard to say he's not. So thank you.
Thank you. Panel, your next question will be first directed to Mr. Genda.
What person in politics today do you find yourself modeling yourself after, or that you want to model yourself after, and how so?
He just retired, Don Leahy. Whenever I would listen to Don speak at a forum, he was this common sense, easy to understand, easy to follow, didn't use a lot of words, but the words he used were very powerful, and I find him to be, as I've walked into this arena, I'd like to be a Don Leahy.
Mr. Weist.
For me, it'd be Jim Jordan. I'm picking somebody at a national level, but I love his fire, I love his passion, I love the work and the commitment he has for our country and trying to do the right thing and standing up for what's right. It may not always be the popular thing, but he always chooses to do the right thing. And I think he's a true patriot, a true conservative, a true leader, and somebody I would definitely model myself after.
Mr. Bagsby.
To be honest, Dave, I couldn't answer that. I'm not a politician. I've never been a politician. I'm definitely not a career politician. I didn't want to aspire to be a politician. I am just a normal guy, a father, a family man who thinks that I can contribute with my common sense approach and my black and white Constitution, blue book that I carry around. I think that A lot of the problems of today is caused by politicians, and no politician in general, but just the culture of politicians and those who just aspired just to get elected. I'm not that person, so I couldn't really answer that question. Sorry.
Thank you. Panel, your next question will first be directed to Mr. Weist.
So in past legislative sessions, state lawmakers have tried to assert some control over, county and city issues such as business tax breaks this session that would have impacted local government budgets. Legislation last year that tried to regulate local decision-making around wind energy projects. How would you approach issues of local versus state control as a lawmaker?
Spending 5 years serving on a township board, I understand the importance of keeping policy as close to the people as possible. Every community is so different, and every community has such different needs. Nobody's going to know better for their community what those needs are than their local government, their city council, their county council. So I like the state to stay out of local policy making as much as possible. I'm always going to be a proponent for keeping government as close to the people as possible.
Thank you. Mr. Bagsby.
So I think we really should incentivize our small businesses over big corporate interests who has an unfair advantage due to how the state favors them. During the COVID pandemic, we had a lot of small businesses close. We had a lot of churches closed too. But there were some corporations that didn't have to close. And I think addressing it on a local level is the appropriate approach. But I think the state needs to know when to step in and when to stay out. So that's how I would approach it. I approach it on a local level. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Genda.
I like how you brought up wind energy, because our neighbors over from Clinton County over in Tipton County, they decided that they're for wind energy. And I think that they have that right as a county to do that. What I like about, and whereas Clinton County has a right not to do that, and certainly any type of state mandate on that or state passage of a law to make us have a wind farm would be wrong. What I like about the idea of local government is this. I can walk into any restaurant or any grocery store in my local town, and I can actually see my local government standing there in the cereal aisle. And I can actually talk them eyeball to eyeball and say, hey, explain to me why you did that, or what you're thinking on that. That's where the whole local idea comes in. The most important is I can actually stand there with my people and know my people. It's our job as representatives of 65,000, if we be elected, that's a lot of people to get to know. And that's why the local level is such an important, they know their local issues, and it needs to be kept. Smaller government is better government.
Thank you. Panel, your next question, Mr. Bagsby.
I'm going to follow up on that question with something that's maybe a bit more specific. The Tennessee General Assembly, I believe the Senate passed this bill last week, is considering a bill that would let the state override local laws that block fossil fuel projects in their communities. Would you support a similar measure in Indiana?
Is that to me?
It is, sir.
Oh, would I support the state blocking fossil fuel companies from?
The law allows state regulators to override local decisions to block fossil fuel infrastructure from passing through their communities. Would you support a similar measure here?
I would not. Okay, so I'm not familiar with that particular state, but crossing over local government, that goes against our Constitution. We have our government, we shouldn't allow the federal government to usurp power of the state government. We should not allow the state government to usurp power over the local government. Local government is closest to the people, And so if the people is not giving consent, then that should be it. So I hope I answered your question appropriately.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Genda.
That one, there's not enough detail in here for me to give a good answer on this one. Are we talking about, when you talk about fossil fuels, we're talking about running a pipeline through the center of a town, on the edge of a countryside, or are we putting in a well pump out on someone's farm? I guess what I'm saying to you on this one, I don't have enough information to give you a good answer. So therefore, I do not have an answer to that one.
Thank you. Mr. Weist?
I would refer back to my last answer. I believe that local government knows its community better than anybody else. I never believe there should be a reason for a state to override a local government decision. I believe that government needs to stand as close to the people as possible, and if that was a local decision made by local legislators, I believe that was probably the best decision for the community. So I would have stood by the local government, and if I was a state elected official, I would have definitely respected the decision of the local government that made that decision.
All right, panel, your next question will first be directed to Mr. Genda.
What's one thing you think that the state can do, or you can do as a state lawmaker, to help businesses deal with workforce questions they have when finding enough workers to meet the demand they say they have?
Boy, isn't that the truth. This is one that I thought, how can we as a state get people back to work? Where are the workers? I think we're all asking that question. Where are the workers? And obviously what I've experienced with owning my business, there's a new breed of worker out there that wants different things than what we understand it to be. We all used to work to live, and they live to work. And so what I've been doing with my people is, especially my younger people, my millennials, I guess, if that's the term we want to use for them, is we have to be a little more creative. They want time, and they're not so hung up on making money. So how do you make more time in 24 hours in a day? Well, what I've done is this. I've been more creative with their schedule. Now, would there be a state mandate on these things? I think if anything, what I'd like to see us do is help small businesses or businesses in general, maybe not make a law or a law about this or pass a bill on this, but how can we research and pass on to business owners on, let's develop a new plan for the new worker, because we have to get them. Because what happened is all the 50-somethings, we stepped out, and so there's nobody filling that gap. So we're just going to have to be more creative, and I would like to see this state stop talking.
Mr. Weist, your question.
As I've traveled around, especially to Clinton, Boone, Montgomery counties, this is one of the biggest issues that I hear about in talking to voters and business owners, large and small. And I think one of the solutions for this, because I think one of the biggest problems is housing, affordable workforce housing. There's not enough of it. Working in the housing industry, what I see every day is 30% of the cost of a house now is in regulations. We need to deregulate some of our housing. We need to get workforce affordable housing back so that workers can move into some of these smaller communities where the housing is affordable, where developers can afford to go to Frankfurt, go to Lebanon, go to Darlington in these areas and do developments and build housing that workers at these companies can afford to live in. And I think that'll help our issue with workforce.
Mr. Bagsby.
So I'm a carpenter by trade out of Local 215. Once again, like I said before, I'm a construction managing superintendent as well, so I'm always around the labor force, and I think our biggest issue is we're not doing a really good job incentivizing high schoolers to get into the trades. We really push college on them, and there's nothing wrong with college, but I've been swinging a hammer since I was knee-high to a grasshopper. There's nothing wrong with it, but like I said, we don't market the electrical trades, the plumbing trades, the HVAC trades. We don't market that as much as we market the college. And so now, since our as we call them, our older journeymen are retiring, especially in the electrical trade. We've seen a big hit in electrical trade when all the old timers were retiring. There was no youngsters to replace them because, you know, we incentivized liberal art degrees, political science degrees. Nothing wrong with none of that. But if we don't have builders, who's gonna pave our roads? Who's gonna build our buildings? You know, so I think we need to get back to that. As Mark said, we can't create a bill on it, but we can at least spend a lot of time recruiting, especially going into these high schools and doing job fairs. So,
Thank you, sir. Panel, your next question will be directed first to Mr. Weist.
So actually, the housing question, that is a question that I have, because I think that lack of housing options is an issue across the state, across income levels, and it does become a really pressing issue when, you know, for instance, in Montgomery County, you have a new Tempur-Sealy factory company, you know, coming, and 300 new jobs, and where are these people going to live? You spoke to this a bit, but again, what kinds of policies would you support to help municipalities develop more and better housing stock, not just for future residents, but for current residents?
Sure. You know, I would like to help communities with grant programs. There's a lot of grant options out there to help with utilities, getting that, you know, to run to some of these areas. I definitely would like to look at regulations, as I mentioned in my last question. The regulations really hold back communities right now and developers. The cost of us developing land right now is about 30% higher than it was just 5 years ago, due to continued regulations, a lot of those being environmental. So I think that we need to look at these communities, look how we can help them, and look at how the policies of our state are affecting the development in these communities.
Thank you. Mr. Bagsby.
So I really don't have a proper answer for that. I can say I am a real estate agent for Keller Williams, and with the inflation rates through the roof, that could pose a problem, but getting more people back into the workforce drives the housing market. And if we can't find a solution to that problem, then we will, I believe that we will continue seeing a drop in the housing. So I don't have a proper answer right now, though.
Thank you. Mr. Genda.
The whole idea of building is always this, the infrastructure. What can a small town take on with new? It's not just putting a house up. There's things that come out of the house that have to go someplace. Infrastructure. I know that there was a grant in one of the towns that I own one of my businesses in. They got a brand new main line running down it. Guess what? It cost me $18,000 to hook up to it because I had to put a brand new line on. Now for me, that wasn't a thing. But for the fixed income person that was down the street, that free money, that free grant money was not free. There is nothing free in regards to that. So being a rental owner, I know that there's a shortage, at least in my community, for housing. Getting people back to work to buy affordable housing, I don't think that was addressed strong enough. It's not that they're not out there. We've got to figure out what gets the worker back to work. It's not like what we're used to. This is a whole new beast, this whole group. And I agree with trades. I'm almost a trade. I had 18 months education to do what I do. I'm a trade worker. But what I'm saying to you is, the new worker to buy the new houses, we've got to figure out what makes them tick, because it's not like our days.
Thank you. Panel, your next question will first be directed to Mr. Bagsby.
Do you support the legalization of marijuana for either medicinal or recreational use?
I would be, as far as medical use goes, I would definitely be a part of the conversations, but as far as recreational use, I've always been against recreational use and legalizing it. But just to pivot a little bit off of that, I don't believe that people should be facing 30 years in prison over the use of marijuana in small quantities. But I would not support the passage of recreational. No.
Thank you. Mr. Genda.
Medicinal, yes, absolutely. Doctor writes a prescription for it, and they have found that for a lot of cancer patients, it gives them a lot of ease, helps with their anxiety. Absolutely medical. Recreational, no. Now, everybody keeps saying, though, and I say everybody, when you drive into Michigan, what plates do you see in the parking lot, right? And so I think it's interesting how states, by the freedoms that we have, we pick the vices that we're okay with. Remember, for a long time, and here I'll touch on this topic, you might as well hear it all. We were one of the first ones to be okay with gambling, and that's a vice. So I think we got to be a little careful when you point a finger, 3 point back. So no, I don't support legalizing marijuana for recreational use, and yes, I do for prescriptions.
Thank you. Mr. Weist.
For medicinal purposes, absolutely. I've known families with children that deal with epilepsy, that it's helped with the effects of that, and cancer patients, as mentioned. But for recreational purposes, absolutely not. I don't believe it would benefit our citizens of our state to have lawful recreational use of marijuana.
Panel, your next question will first be directed to Mr. Genda.
On the question of COVID mandates for businesses to have their own testing of their employees, did you back that, or do you think the state should regulate what businesses can and can't do with COVID mandates?
Let me see.
With vaccination mandates, I'm sorry.
Oh, vaccination mandates? No, in my office, it was an office of choice. I didn't, there were those of us that we were vaccinated, and I had those employees that chose not to be vaccinated, and I didn't have any issues with that. We did make it pretty difficult when we're dealing with the small staff that I had. When one of our people were exposed, it made it really difficult for us. See, the funeral service didn't shut down. We continued through 2020, and we had a lot of interesting things. I went from 10 people to 25 people to 100 people. So working through the mandates that were handed to me, we did it. So I didn't impose anything on my people. And when one of them was infected, we all got tested by choice. And because I couldn't feel that I could expose my clients to any of us that might have been infected.
Mr. Weist.
As a citizen of the United States, I believe in our personal freedoms. I don't believe our personal freedoms match mandates. I think that should be left to the individual. I don't think that should be the company choice. I think the company should allow each individual to make that choice for themselves. As we saw with our governor, I think it was a complete overreach in our state. I think it affected our schools. I think it affected our children. It affected our businesses, our economy. It was absolutely detrimental to our state with how he continued to overreach. And I think that it needs to go to individual rights. And the company I worked for left it up to us, and I completely respected that. And if you wanted to wear a mask in the office, you could wear a mask in the office. If you didn't, you didn't. If you wanted to get vaccinated, you could. If you didn't want to, you didn't have to. And I think that's part of it being an American, and I completely respected that.
Thank you. Mr. Bagsby.
We are a nation of laws, and we are a state of laws, not a state of mandates and rules. I think if we can just abide by the laws and the Indiana Constitution, I think it would make a better state. As far as vaccine mandates in the workforce goes, we lost a lot of good workers, We lost a lot of good nurses. We lost a large population of children in our schools as well over vaccine mandates. No one should be forced to take a vaccine, especially a vaccine that has barely 3 years of life, you know. No one should be forced to wear a mask. And so I am completely against mandates. I'm completely against forced vaccinations. We vaccinate our children with, you know, normal vaccines that has been studied. But I'm not against vaccines. And if someone wants to take a vaccine, that's their prerogative, that's their body autonomy, you know. I'm a medical freedom candidate, and I do not believe that I should be forced to vaccine to feed my family, so.
Thank you. Panel, your next question will first be directed to Mr. Weist.
So communities across the state are working through the process of deciding how to spend their American Rescue Plan dollars, and that can range from broadband expansion to addressing wastewater infrastructure. So looking at the district, you know, what would you identify as some of the most pressing projects or needs towards which that funding could be put?
Both of the issues you brought up are probably the two most important in our district. Broadband is a huge issue in our rural communities. I know in Tippecanoe County, we're using that grant money to expand broadband. In the next few years, every citizen in our county will have access to broadband, which is phenomenal. I think $14 million is going towards that project. I know that in Clinton and Montgomery and Boone, especially in the rural areas, that's a huge problem. So I think that's a great way to put the money towards. But also infrastructure, as you mentioned, getting water and sewer out to those areas that could be developed for housing. With the housing shortages we have in these communities, that'd be a great way to use the money as well, to get that out there so developers can come into the community and bring development, bring housing, which will help the workforce problems.
Thank you. Mr. Bagsby.
I also agree. I think using that money for broadband, especially in District 41, it's mostly a rural area, a rural district, would greatly benefit our district. Also, I believe using that money for at-risk youths, youths that didn't grow up with role models, fathers and mothers, who's in our juvenile systems. I think that we could improve in our juvenile systems. But also, I think we could use that money for our drug epidemic. We have a opioid problem and a fentanyl problem. I think we could use that money for that as well. So,
thank you. Mr. Genda.
I'm always going to go back to and lean heavily on the infrastructure part, and not only for housing, but in some of the agricultural areas that I talked to in Clinton County and Boone County. We have drainage issues that we've had for a long time. But I go back to, I think a lot of things are stemming back to, I keep beating this drum, and I just will, is our workforce issues. I told you, let's use the money to study how to get people back to work. I think that is the huge thing. When we get them back to work, they start buying houses. We get them back to work. The money is there for the families to have choices that they had when they had funds to do it with. I mean, the whole idea of filling up our gas tank at $100, I mean, we have got to get jobs here and get our workforce into those jobs that can start getting us going again financially. And the counties are the ones that need to be in control of those funds anyway. It shouldn't be state regulated. We need to go to the counties and say, okay, what can we do as a state to help you develop your county? What do you need? Because Tippecanoe is different than Clinton, is different than Boone. As I've walked around and seen what's going on down in Boone, you know, they're a donut of Indianapolis right now, and completely different than what's going on in Clinton County. And the locals know that. Keep it local.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, panelists. We've now reached the time in our evening where it is time for closing remarks. Each candidate will have up to 2 minutes. We will begin with Mr. Bagsby.
So in closing, I'm not a politician. I wasn't asked to run. But I think it's our duty as individual patriots to stand up for our beliefs, our individual rights, stand up for the Constitution. I believe our rights have been infringed upon, especially these last few years. And I think it's time for normal, everyday citizens to step up and run for an office. And you know what? I may not have all the experience necessary, but that means that my vision is clear. That means my mission is straight. My feet are on the narrow path of upholding this Indiana Constitution. The narrow path of knowing what's right from wrong and not trying to bridge a gap between right and wrong. And vetting bills, knowing and asking the question, does these bills go against our Indiana and U.S. Constitution? Does these bills infringe on our personal, individual rights and freedoms? And is it a burden on our taxpayers, or are we focused on social initiatives? Things that doesn't matter. Are we protecting the unborn? Are we protecting our children in school? Or do we want to just be politicians? That's the question. Do you want to uphold the Constitution of this great state? Do you want someone to represent the Constitution? Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Genda.
I have appreciated the opportunity to be with these two gentlemen and had no idea the adventure that I have embarked upon when I first started. And what I appreciate about, I know there's not, some have said, why isn't there more interest? Why aren't there more candidates running? Why don't we have more choices? I don't know, because the three of us stood up. I appreciate and have the entire time, I sit here and I appreciate the passion that Richard has on his topic of his Constitution, in the rights of the Constitution, and in what he believes in that. And I appreciate Shane, who went, to Purdue University for a degree in poli-sci. I mean, Shane and I had lunch together, and he says, Mark, it's always been my dream to be a politician. And I thought, fantastic. And I thought, well, then what are you, Genda? Well, I'm this. As I said from the very beginning, I got into this race because I believe that I have an ability to connect with people. And I believe that that connection with people is what needs to happen in government. The government is for the people. It is the people. It's not policies. It's people forward. And I think sometimes, as I've talked with folks, they just say, no one's listening to us. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I'll tell you what. If I'm elected, I will tell you this. I absolutely will listen to you. And I will hear you. Not only listen, I will hear you. And I will take that voice to the state, and I will represent District 41 to the best of my ability if elected. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Weist.
First off, I want to thank all of you for being here tonight. I think it says a lot about you and how important you see elections are, especially at our local levels, how sacred you hold your right to vote, which for me is my most sacred part of being an American, having the ability to choose my leaders. And I think that it's so important that we learn about our candidates, we stay focused on our elections, as we've seen, at the presidential level, how quick things can change. So I just wanted you to know how much I appreciate all of you taking the time to be here. It's been a blessing going around District 41, knocking on doors and meeting people. I've just heard some incredible stories. At the end of this, if nothing else, I just feel so blessed to learn about people and their lives and where they've come from. And I've spent a lot of a lot of evenings learning life stories from individuals in their 90s, you know, and they don't have a lot of people come to their door, and just to stand there and talk to them for 15 or 20 minutes and just appreciate who they are. And I'm doing this for my children and for your children and your grandkids. I think it's so important that we hold our values in our state, that we stay fiscally responsible, that we make good choices so that they can live the Hoosier dream just like we've had the opportunity to do. I've spent my life serving this community. I'm proud of that. I've met a lot of great people. I've served on a lot of boards. I've never said no to much because I believe that God put us on this earth to serve people. And, that's what I'm here to do. I'm here to serve you. I'm here to serve the constituents of District 41. And I want to be a voice for the people, and I want to stay close to the people, and I want to make decisions based on the best interest of the people. And I appreciate all of you being here this evening.
Thank you, sir. Thank you all for being here tonight. We're going to pause for a couple of minutes. A quick word from Tracy Brown before we get into the Indiana Senate District 23 candidates.
Thank you. And as Gina just announced, we'll have about a 3-minute break while we change out some of the equipment. So bear with us. And we will have a message from U.S. Senator Todd Young.
Good evening, fellow Republicans. First, I want to thank you for being here to learn more about your Statehouse candidates. Running for office is hard work, and our country's stronger for the men and women who step up to lead. Thank you to those debating tonight for your service to Indiana. Good evening, fellow Republicans. First, I want to thank you for being here to learn more about your Statehouse candidates. Running for office is hard work, and our country's stronger for the men and women who step up to lead. Thank you to those debating tonight for your service to Indiana. We all know how much we need more leaders to step up in Washington. We're all tired of the failure in D.C. Real Hoosier families are hurting because of this administration's policies. Inflation's at an all-time high, government spending is out of control, there's a crisis at our southern border, violent crime continues to rise in our cities, and tyrants in Afghanistan and Russia and China rule unchallenged. Friends, you're here because you know this needs to change. We need to return to the Republican results we saw with President Trump. We had a record economy and record jobs numbers. We put 3 justices on the United States Supreme Court, including Indiana's own Amy Coney Barrett. America was respected on the world stage. Those are the results Americans demand and that we deserve. As you may know, I'm on the ballot this year for my first re-election to the United States Senate. I want to promise you that I'm doing everything I can to hold this seat. That's why I'm excited to be joining you at Tippecanoe County's annual Lincoln Day dinner. I hope you'll join me as we get this red wave election year started. Again, thank you for your time this evening. We're going to make sure we win back the Senate this fall and get our country back on track.
mix it up a little bit. But if you want to start off, more power to you.
All right, without further ado, if everyone is ready, we will go ahead and get started with Indiana Senate District 23. We'll begin with introductions, and we will start with our first chair right here, Mr. Bill Webster.
Good evening. My name is Bill Webster. I am a resident of Park County, Indiana. I reside in Rockville. I am a sales and marketing manager for the Edward C. Levy Company, and Senate District 23 sits inside of my sales territory, so I have a finger of the pulse of the district. I speak with business owners on a regular basis, whether that is contractors, excavating companies, also counties. I sell aggregate products. I'm a GOP chair for Park County, and I've served my community for many years. I was a volunteer fireman for over 20 years, and county chairman for the Salvation Army.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Christian Beaver.
Good evening, I'm Christian Beaver, resident of Tippecanoe County in West Lafayette, married with a wife and 4 daughters, Purdue grad, running for the state senate. We live in a country and a state deeply divided in more ways than we can count. Part of what divides us is that some parts of Indiana have been left behind. Rural areas without broadband, counties with no hospitals, small towns deserted, communities where once thriving factories stood. If we are again going to be a country with a common vision and a common purpose, we need to bridge this divide. That's why I'm running for the Indiana State Senate. All counties deserve safe roads. All children deserve access to schools at work, and all Hoosiers in rural Indiana deserve access to quality health care, affordable child care, and drug-free communities that thrive. It's the kind of Indiana I want. It's the kind of Indiana we all want. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Spencer Deery.
Good evening. My name is Spencer Deery, as she said. I am a husband to my wife of 15 years, a father to 3 children who are a handful, but I love them. I'm a Sunday school teacher, a youth basketball coach, a Boilermaker, a Purdue grad, a senior aide to Mitch Daniels at the university. What I am not is I am not a politician. I have never ran for elected office and frankly never intended to at this stage of my life. But I'm doing so because I believe that it's important that we have conservative leaders to step up and answer the call to duty and service, and I'm excited to make my case to you here tonight.
Thank you. Ms. Paula Copenhaver.
Hello, my name is Paula Copenhaver, and I'm currently the Fountain County Clerk. I've been clerk for 6 years. I am a mother. I have 5 children. I have 3 grandbabies, and 2 more on the way. And I had never aspired to be an elected official. I just merely got involved by teaching our Constitution. I started teaching the Constitution in 2012 to our homeschool group. I did homeschool my children, all 5 of them, and as of today, all 5 of them are graduated. And so, a lot of work there. But in the process of teaching our children, I learned about our Constitution and our constitutional rights, and I began to become concerned about our government and government overreach, and that was clear back in 2012. So I started educating myself, and not just myself, but everybody I come in contact with. And in the process, that's how I received my job as Fountain County Clerk. And I'm stepping up to run for State Senate.
All right, thank you so much. Panel, your first question should be directed to Mr. Bill Webster.
I'd be interested in hearing about your decision to run for office. Could you kind of take us through the process? It's essentially a life-changing decision, what you're doing. It's a big thing. And some of those decisions are made at the spur of the moment, and others are much more like a snowman, and it just takes time to build up. Take us through your process, and why is now the right time for you?
So, for me, it was, I'd ran in 2010. I ran for Senate in the general race back when Park County was in Senate District 38, and I had kind of put that behind me. In my job in sales and marketing, I enjoy what I do. I love getting out and speaking with people, and I do that for a living. What's really changed for me and where that moment came was the federal government overreach. What I refer to as Fedzilla just keeps getting bigger and bigger, and it's out of control. And the whole COVID thing, watching the state and some of these mandates and the things that went on, and I find it very concerning and alarming. And I'm a husband of 24 years. I'm a father. I'm a grandfather, and our future. I'm very concerned for our future, and it takes good people to stand up to make a difference. And I felt like it was time for me to get back involved, and here I am.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Beaver.
Running for public office is something that I thought about probably some 15 years ago, and I'd all but written it off. I wasn't convinced that it was a good way to affect meaningful and lasting change. My problem was I watched too much cable news, and the guys on there just seemed to be doing fine on their own, so I would just leave them to it. But then some years ago, I got connected with some of the elected officials here in Tippecanoe County, and I met people that I wasn't sure I would ever see in my life, people who genuinely seemed to care, who worked hard, and really wanted to listen to what people had to say. As for why I'm running now, the answer has come to me as I've been traveling throughout this district. There's a lot of people in a lot of need that have some real challenges, and they needed some real help. And that's what I was raised to do. It's what I know how to do, is listen and try to help people as best I can.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Deery.
So you're right, it is a big decision to make, and one that we had to certainly figure out would it work for me, my career, my family. But it wasn't anything that I expected or anticipated. It really started looking at the new district and looking at the challenges that we have in our state and politics in general, and looking at the opportunities that we have as well to advance the conservative movement, and realizing that those challenges and opportunities were too great to leave to conservative politicians rather than conservative leaders, or to aspiring career politicians rather than public servants. And I felt like, as I talked to people, that we needed somebody who could step up and who could be a conservative leader and not just a conservative politician. And because those challenges are great and they are real, and I aspire to not be a politician, but to be able to make that difference, and when the time's right, that I've done some good, to step back and go back to my quiet life, which I very much enjoy.
Thank you. Ms. Copenhaver.
So the reason I'm running for Senate District 23, I could have ran another term as Fountain County Clerk and been comfortable, probably not had any competition. But with the overreach from the pandemic, it was very evident. As I said, I've been studying the Constitution since 2012, and not just studying it, but I've been teaching it. And I know what the government's responsibility is, and more importantly, I know what their responsibility is not. And I've been concerned from the beginning, and that is why I'm running for State Senate District 23. Like I said, I could have ran again for Fountain County Clerk and been comfortable. And the other reason is I prayed about it, and I sought the Lord for my life. And I felt like I'd be disobedient to what the Lord has called me to if I did not run. And that is why I'm running for State Senate District 23.
Thank you, Pam. Panel, your next question will first be directed to Mr. Beaver.
Indiana teachers complained that the legislature this year overreached and tried to do too many things to get into the classrooms and basically micromanage what they were doing. Do you think the teachers had a point, or do you think that the legislature just didn't get done what you wanted them to get done? Where do you stand on that debate?
My degree from Purdue is in elementary education, so I have I'll say a more qualified perspective on that issue. But what qualifies it even further and even more so is, as I've been going around, one of the top two issues that I get asked about are the education bills that our legislature has been kicking around down in Indianapolis. And I have not found one public educator in the district who had a positive opinion on what they were trying to do. I have families who are educators in various parts of the state. I understand what they were trying to do, but for the schools in these rural counties, like with House Bill 1134, it does more harm than it does good. And that's what they're telling me. That's what makes sense to me as someone who comes out of education. It's very important that our rural schools feel like our state government is going to support them, support rural educators and families alike.
Thank you. Mr. Deery.
So there's a balance to meet here. So first of all, I come from a long line of public educators as well. My father was a principal for about 35 years. My mom was an educator as well. So I've seen the sacrifices and the challenges that teachers go through in their dedication and support them in that. And so there is one concern when it's not a conservative principle to have the state government micromanaging and bossing around local education. Now, with that said, it's important to remember too, though, that public educators work for taxpayers. And so there is a role for the state government to be able to guide and direct educators in making sure they're accomplishing the goals and focus on things that are most important for the long-term objectives of the state. But it needs to be done in a way that also is respectful of the professionals that teachers are. So there's definitely a sweet spot to hit there and a balance. Sometimes in certain iterations of bills, I think the General Assembly was nearing the point of finding that sweet spot, and other times I think they were overreaching. So there's definitely a sweet spot to find.
Thank you. Ms. Copenhaver.
So teachers should be allowed to teach, and kids should be allowed to be kids. As far as House Bill 1134, if you go and you look at if this is the obscenity, what they were trying to get it passed, what they were trying to do, if you go and look at the source of the bill, is to keep pornography and obscenity out of the schools. If somebody were to come along on the street and give somebody a pornographic material, it's a crime. But if our education system and our teachers are allowed to give our children pornographic material in the name of education, then it's acceptable. And I think that was the basis of the legislation that they were trying to pass. On another note, being on the legislative committee for the Clerks Association, I also know that it is very beneficial for the legislators to talk to those who the laws are going to directly affect. And so if they're wanting to pass something, then they should have that discussion with the teachers first before they ever draw up their legislation and see how we can benefit them and come along together, or if it even really needs to be legislated.
Thank you. Mr. Webster.
I believe there's a balance there between, where the state legislature needs to get involved in the school boards. The teachers, there's a lot of great teachers out there, and we can all discuss. Every one of us could pick out that one teacher that made a difference in our lives, right? So, there's the great teachers, but there's a few bad apples here and there, and I think a lot of times, that kind of gets highlighted a little bit, and then you know, that's the discussion, I guess. So I believe that the General Assembly and the House bill, I believe they were headed in the right direction. And again, they missed their marks a few times, and it's something that they just need to keep an eye on.
Thank you. Panel, your next question will first be directed to Mr. Deery.
So when redistricting maps were released, some local Democratic leaders raised some concerns about, to use one chief example, the fact that West Lafayette was kind of carved out. It's more urban, more populated, into a district with more rural areas, such as Fountain County. The argument kind of being that maybe these aren't communities of interest being kept together. So in what ways are the needs of these different areas similar? And then how are you going to work to bridge some of the differences?
In what ways are the needs of the rural and the
there are more urban areas similar?
So the one issue, well, two issues that really jump out that no matter what part you're from are important to the constituents I talk to is one is workforce. Everybody's having issues finding the workforce that they need and having the workforce that develops, that's prepared. Secondly is education. No matter what part you're in, our public schools are important to you. And it's especially true in some of our rural counties too, where I grew up in a small town. Your public school is your center of your community. But we know certainly in West Lafayette, that's a really very true as well, a lot of passion for our schools. So the two issues that jump out to me as being unique are being common are both of those. And now, yes, there are some separate issues. There is not as the same, Tippecanoe County is growing. I think West Lafayette's doubled in the last 10 years. I think that's the only part of the district that's happened. So what we need to do is we need to try and extend that economic growth beyond just the Purdue area, which is currently, as we know, is happening strong, and get that beyond there and get every county having an economic engine of its own. And that needs to be a priority of the attention of lawmakers at every level.
Thank you. Ms. Copenhaver.
So as far as the new district being more urban and more rural, the majority of the district is rural. And the differences are, quite evident. But the people that live in the rural area, they live there for a reason, and we understand that living in a rural area, you're gonna drive no matter what to get to wherever you're gonna go. Each county already has rural development, economic rural development offices, places to help develop more economics within the county. I think it's left best up to each local community to reach out and to develop their own economies for their county. Workforce is low in some areas, and we drive. Like I said, when you live in the rural communities, you already plan on driving to go anywhere. There's no easy way to get anywhere in Fountain County. I don't know if you know that or not, but I think it's something that we have differences, and but we're all people. And so whether you live in the urban area or the rural area, it doesn't matter. I don't think there's really a divide there. I think it's a choice of where we choose to live.
Thank you. Mr. Webster.
So when they redistrict, I mean, you have to put large amounts of population. You have to get your population from somewhere, right? Or the district would be huge, if you're just rural area. So you have to have that population. We're all people with different challenges. I mean, the Tippecanoe area, you have more population than, say, Fountain County, obviously. But in people, we all have the same challenges. So, one county might be a little bit different than the other, but I think to be a legislator with, where you have challenges of different things, that's part of it. You have to understand that going in. I hope I've answered your question.
Thank you. Mr. Beaver.
I'm sorry, Emilie, it's been about a minute since you asked the question. Could you repeat it one time for me?
Yes, I can. So we're just talking about, the new map, the district, how it's kind of West Lafayette kind of paired with some more rural areas, and just kind of talking about what are the similarities here with all of these residents, and then how do you bridge the gap with some of the differences?
Absolutely, okay. Yeah, Sure, there's differences between Tippecanoe County and the other 5 counties in the district. There's differences between West Lafayette and Lafayette, too. If anything, I think that West Lafayette and some of these rural counties might have more in common than a lot of people might not think. A lot of people, as I've been getting around in these counties, West Lafayette and Tippecanoe County is a regular part of their life. Whether they're working there, they're shopping there, they are often find themselves going to Tippecanoe. And as I've been talking with people, I think a lot of people see this new shared district as a potential opportunity for some of the rural counties to benefit from having one state senator representing the whole area. That's really what I hope to see happen with this new district, and what I think a lot of other people hope to see happen too.
Thank you. Panel, your next question will be first directed to Ms. Copenhaver.
With permanent daylight saving time a real possibility this time around, do you have a position on that change? And do you think Indiana should be in the Eastern time zone at all?
I think Indiana should go back to being what we were before we ever changed daylight savings time. And I'm looking forward to not ever having to change my clock again. That's what I want to do. And as a matter of fact, that's one of the first things that people say to me. When you get in a state legislature, can you please put it back the way it was? And so that's my position.
Thank you. Mr. Webster.
I would like first, would you repeat the question, please? I want to make sure I understand you correctly.
Yeah, permanent daylight saving time is a real possibility now on the federal level. Do you have a position on that change? And do you think Indiana truly belongs in the Eastern time zone?
Okay, so I hope it does go back that way, and I would like for Indiana to be in the Eastern time zone.
Thank you. Mr. Beaver.
Yeah, funnily enough, like Paula said, I've been asked about this multiple times. A lot of people care more about this than I would have guessed. But my personal preference and what I am hearing from a lot of people saying that they would like to see us on Eastern time as well.
Thank you. Mr. Deery.
So I work for Mitch Daniels, so you can guess that I hear it a lot. But you know, if the worst thing you can say about a governor, I think, is something related to something that really is trivial as time, I think that says a lot about the quality of the governor. But so for me, I think that the best of both worlds would be if this is taken care of at the federal level, and then we can have the Indiana time that we liked, but we also cannot have the difference in the disparities and the confusion that we had, and still maintain some of the economic growth that resulted from having that switch. Particularly, we're trying to get, say, for example, at airport, commercial aviation, that's one thing that's important to them, is not having that confusion. So if we could have both, have it taken care of at the federal level and be consistent, I think that would be the best. Now, in terms of which time zone, I feel that as a legislator, this is one where I would really want to listen to the people. My personal opinion is I like mowing the lawn very late at night, but I'm not going to make that decision if I'm the only one and most of the district feels like we want to be on Central Time. I can sacrifice that. And so this is one that's not important enough to me. It's really, which way it is, Central, Eastern, that I'm going to really be listening to the constituents decide what's best.
Thank you, sir. Panel, your next question will first be directed to Mr. Webster.
The legislature this year mandated that school boards take public comment. Is that the job of the legislature to set a school board agenda? And what would you do about that kind of reach into local matters?
So in general, I'm always going to go back to government closest to the people. That's always going to be my first go-to. The struggle that the General Assembly had this year is, parents are taxpayers, and the taxpayers run the school. They own the school, right? So if I'm a parent and I cannot speak, these school boards mandate that nobody's allowed to speak at a board meeting. That's a concern for me. And if I would have been in the General Assembly this session, I would have voted in favor of that, yes.
Thank you. Mr. Beaver.
The voters are all telling me that they want to see more control at the local level, less control at the state level. I personally want to see public comment at every school board meeting. I believe if the vote were before me on whether or not to vote to make school boards allow public comment, speaking with the people in the district, that's what they want to see. So if that's what it takes, if they're willing to move that up a notch to require that they are able to make public comments at school board meetings, then I will support that.
Thank you. Mr. Deery.
My bias and preference as well for allowing local control is a pretty sturdy one, a pretty strong one to have to overcome. So I tend to prefer to allow local control and don't view it as a conservative principle, having legislators bossing around local education. Now, I agree, we do need transparency, and we do need public comment as much as possible, and I encourage school board members to do that. I don't know that it's necessarily the role of the General Assembly to mandate that, barring some egregious rule or abuse of local control in a way that is clearly inappropriate, but I think it's a pretty high burden to overcome. Last thing I'll say, I think it's inappropriate and hypocritical for the General Assembly to mandate things that they're not willing to follow themselves, and I think that we were pretty close to getting there on this one.
Thank you. Ms. Copenhaver.
Well, it is the parents' responsibility to educate their children. It's not the government's responsibility. And if they choose to send them to for public education, then they should have the right to be heard. And I think that can best be dealt with at a local level. That's why we have local elections for school board. And if the school board is a problem, then sign yourself up and run for school board member.
Thank you. Panel, your next question will first be directed to Mr. Beaver.
So a U.S. Supreme Court ruling expected, I believe, this summer could significantly change parts of Roe v. Wade, give more control back to the states over abortion restrictions. So specifically, how far should Indiana go in restricting abortions? What does that ideally look like for you? And then secondarily, what policies would you support, and how would you work to help Hoosier families with children?
Abortion is the intentional killing of an innocent human life. So I'm pro-life, and I will always be on the side of things that is seeking to rein in abortions. I would like to see us get to no abortions. To your second question, which I really appreciate, is not something that I hear a whole lot about, which is what are we doing about these young women who are pregnant, who have lack of resource, lack of support. We, as Republicans, are often criticized for what they say is once the baby's born, you don't really care what happens to it, do you? And I really do care what happens to it. And I've served as a CASA, and I've seen families broken up. I've seen children separated from parents. I've seen parental rights being terminated. We need to do more to help these women with prenatal care and help them to stay on their feet after the child is born. Something else that isn't talked about is the other side of the pregnancy. You know, it takes two. And I would like to see provisions in bills that addresses prenatal care and the second party responsible for the pregnancy. We need to make sure that these people are cared for after the birth.
Thank you. Mr. Deery.
5 years old. That's about how old my son would have been. We had a child who was born, who was stillborn about 5 years ago. And before his death, we heard his heartbeat. After he was born in a hospital, just like our other children in the same labor and delivery wing. And we held him, we saw his fingers and toes. And his life was important and valuable, and it wasn't just important and valuable because he was wanted. The idea that you can wish away the value of a human life because a baby is unwanted, to me, is egregiously wrong. And so I am pro-life, and I oppose abortion in every way. But I do really appreciate the second part of the question, too, because as we hopefully reduce or eliminate abortions, that's going to require the rest of the world, from charitable groups to government to everything that we can, to bring towards helping women who are in unfortunate and difficult situations, to helping children who are born in unfortunate and difficult situations, from prenatal care to adoption to addressing poverty. Just simply doing the one without the other is incomplete in my eyes, and if we're going to go this step, we need to step it up in every aspect.
Thank you. Ms. Copenhaver.
All life is precious, from conception till even the end of life. So all life is precious. Every day at noon, I have my alarm set to pray for our nation, and not just for our nation, but for our Supreme Court justices, that their hearts would be awakened to life being precious also. And so to abolish abortion would just be fabulous. As far as taking care of them, it's not the government's job to take care of us. It is the churches, and when I say the church, it is not just a building, it is the believers, the people, and community to come alongside those who have needs and reach out to them and be the support for them. It needs to be easier to have adoptions. And you know, we have a lot of foster care. We have a lot of children in need. But we also need to make that available to people to be able to adopt them out of there easier and to support life, because all life is precious.
Thank you. Mr. Webster.
So 100% pro-life. All of my loose change goes to the local pregnancy crisis center. And I do agree that, you know, and I guess this is something that we'll have to study more, you know, if this does take place with the Supreme Court and that happens, where adjustments will be needed, you know, for programs out there. Because, you know, like adoption, for example, there's a lot of families out there who will adopt, but you know, is there too much regulation and some of that stuff? Is there not enough? You know, that's things that I would certainly be interested in looking at as a legislator.
Thank you. Panelists, your next question should first be directed to Mr. Deery.
Do you believe Joe Biden was elected president in a free and fair election? And do you have confidence in Indiana's election security?
All of these things can be true, and in fact are true. One, in just about every election in my lifetime, there has been a certain amount of fraud and incompetence in elections. Two, that fraud and incompetence has not been enough to sway or determine or change an election. So three, yes, Joe Biden is the president. But four, because there is fraud and incompetence, we need to do everything that we can to ensure the integrity of our elections. That means making sure that absentee ballots come with an identification, which I think we just took care of, that our voter technologies has a paper trail, which bipartisan from right to left Brookings Institute all believe is the gold standard. There's a number of things that we can and need to focus on, and we should, but the short answer is yes.
Thank you. Ms. Copenhaver.
And that is the question of the year, right? Or the last 2 years, whatever. I would venture to say, if he didn't win fairly, if there's possibility that there could be fraud, then why wouldn't we investigate it so that we would know without a shadow of a doubt that yes, he is our president, or no, he is not. And my concern is, as the election administrator for my county, if there is a problem, then we need to get to the bottom of it. Because if we don't have free and fair elections and integrity, then we don't really have a republic. And so our elections in Indiana, I can speak on those for my county specifically. Yeah, they were fair and honest. And we have the ability to determine reconciliation process to make sure that every vote reconciles with every signature of somebody that cast it. And there isn't a voter ID law to vote by mail in the state of Indiana. And so that is something that we need to fix with the legislature. Is if you're gonna vote, you need to show your ID and prove that you are a US citizen first and foremost, and that you are who you say you are before you cast a ballot.
Thank you. Mr. Webster.
Well, he's our president, and we're all dealing with the consequences of that, right? So, you know, in regards of whether, you know, get caught up in that rabbit hole, I guess, of whether, you know, truly won or he didn't win. We need to look forward. So, you know, does the State General Assembly, is there tweaks that need to be made, you know, occasionally? Yeah. The election process should always be, go back to 10th Amendment, that should always stay within the states. You know, the individual states for their own voting laws, it should never be federal. I'll throw that in there. And I will also say, you know, as I've been out on the campaign trail, voting integrity is a huge issue with the voters. They're very concerned about that. But I'll also say as a county chair, you know how hard it is to find poll workers? It's difficult. You know, people want election integrity, but they won't work a poll for the day. And I see some folks in here that's worked some polls. I'm seeing some smiles. You know, get involved. You know, people need to get more involved in their local communities and stuff.
Thank you. Mr. Beaver.
Look, I'm of the opinion that from the very first election, there have been people trying to bend and break the rules. Anybody who says that there's no election fraud that takes place anywhere ever has got to have their head in the sand. Do I believe that he won, you know, legitimately? If there were any shenanigans going on in November of 2020, I don't believe that that swayed or determined the election. So I believe that he won. Now, as far as our state goes, there's always more that we can do. I've spoken with multiple county clerks in our district. We had a men's breakfast recently here in Tippecanoe where our clerk Julie Roush was a guest speaker, and she educated us on the different ways that election fraud occurs, and there's always more that we can do. So I will always be on the side that is trying to strengthen our election security in Indiana.
Thank you. Panelists, your next question should first be directed to Ms. Copenhaver.
What's one issue or problem in District 23 right now that you think you can get done in 2 years as a state lawmaker?
I think I would be naive to think that I could just get anything done right off the get-go. Until you actually work in an office and know what it's all about, you don't really have a real idea as to that whole job's functionality. With that being said, like I've stated, I have studied the Constitution, and I know what the government's responsibility is, and more importantly, I know what the responsibility is not. If it's not defined in the Constitution of the United States, it is the state's responsibility. If it's not defined in the state's constitution, then it should be left to the local government to decide. There are many concerns, many areas of things. I've already gotten legislation passed for 2 towns in my county, and I'm not even a state legislature yet. But I saw that there was a need, and I went to my state legislators that represented me, and I brought the issue before them and laid it out before them, and I testified in the committees before them, and it was passed. And it was for small municipal towns, 3,500 or less, that they would have the option to change their elections from an odd-numbered year to an even-numbered year if they so choose. They didn't have to, but they had that option. In the state of Indiana, there were 18 small cities that affected, and 2 of those were in my county. And so I would go to my constituents, and if there is a need, then I would do the research first and see what the need is, and then I would hit it, full steam ahead.
Thank you. Mr. Webster.
So I would, in the 2 years, and yeah, that's, if I sit here and say that, you know, I'm going to get in there in 2 years, fix the world, no. You know, that's I'd be crazy to say such a thing, I guess. You know, I really to just travel the district and understand, you know, continue, you know, on the campaign trail, so to speak, continue to understand the district a little better every day and the needs, you know, broadband, for example, you know, it was discussed earlier this evening. There is definitely need in certain areas. So as an example, what areas need that more, you know, versus others, and, you know, where will that benefit in areas and for what purpose? So things like that is definitely what I would, you know, want to get a handle on in 2 years. You know, some other things, keeping an eye on, you know, like the mandates, the strong mandates we've seen for a while. So, you know, I'm always going to look out and protect families and voters.
Thank you. Mr. Beaver.
under promise and over deliver, right? That's what you want to do. As I've been going around, I'm very careful about, telling people I'm going to get in there and I'm going to do this and you're going to have this and it's going to be great. At the same time, let me say, my personal MO when I'm on a new team or in a new group is to find, my niche, find the role that I will naturally fill. But I have been encouraged that when I get in there, to go for it. Not in a, not in a Lone Ranger kind of way, but if there's a need that I see and I think, well, we could do something about this, then make no bones about it. And don't be afraid to go for it, to push for it. The number one issue that I am seeing in these counties and what people are telling me, number one, resonating in all counties, inadequate infrastructure. So I want to get in there and I want to, without overpromising, find a way to get, infrastructure funded for these counties in a way that they have immediate, we'll say within 2 years, results that they can see, that they can feel, very discernible.
Thank you. Mr. Deery.
Phil Boots told all of us the other day at an event that it took him a term just to learn where the bathrooms are. So I hope to be a little more optimistic and be more productive than that. But I do agree that it is naive to think that you can go and fix the world in 2 years, or really in 4 is what we should all have at least. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't stop trying to move the needle in every way we can. And that starts by focusing on the issues that really are going to matter most and make the most difference. And one that can do that quickly is simply a budget that's smart, that prioritizes the things that Hoosiers care most about and that will move the needle most. And I intend to work on some of the issues that I think will do the most good for individuals. That includes continuing to foster an environment a sandbox that will lead towards economic growth and development. There are things that are impeding that. Our hospital costs are outrageous. The legislature, the General Assembly, has given in hospitals till April to come up with a plan. I can't imagine we're going to see much there, and we need to hit that issue really hard because we are one of the, if not the most expensive states for hospital costs. Our trade and workforce development is one that we need to start getting that earlier in education, earlier in K-12 education, and destigmatizing the idea of going to a trade school rather than necessarily a university. As much as I love universities, is we need to, and that ties directly to education. So we focus on what matters most, and we start right away, and we aim high and deliver.
Thank you, sir. Panelists, your next question should be directed to Mr. Webster.
So we now allow permitless carry of handguns here in Indiana, and multiple members of law enforcement spoke out against the passage of this legislation. So do you support the passage of the legislation? And I guess, what would you say to members of law enforcement who were concerned that this would impede their ability to respond as they were out doing their work?
Right, so I am strongly pro-Second Amendment, and I do agree and have supported Constitution carry for, every year they've tried to get it passed. I will tell you on the campaign trail, and I was involved in emergency services for over 20 years, you get law enforcement folks, out of the limelight, so to speak, and they'll tell you that they support it as well. Now, there are some that don't, but there are a lot that do. And I also say that, there were 23 states that had it before us, and I've not seen one of them repeal it yet. So, strong supporter. Is there opportunity maybe as we move forward to see, if any of the things that the folks that opposed it were saying, if that's happening, well then, we can always make a change here or there. But I am strong Second Amendment, strong Constitution.
Thank you. Mr. Beaver.
I want to see that the Second Amendment applies to all law-abiding Hoosiers, and I want to make sure that our law enforcement feels supported. Speaking with law enforcement officials in this district, the majority of the ones that I've spoken with were not real in favor of the constitutional carry. The citizens that I've spoken with, the ones who did bring it up, they were in favor of the constitutional carry. this is going to be an issue where I'm going to lean pretty much exclusively on the opinions of the people in the district. I do want to talk about what they really are telling me in these counties. These people are not real concerned about their Second Amendment rights here in Indiana. That's not what they're saying. What they're mostly concerned about is a state government that is out of touch and tone deaf with the pains and the issues faced by everyday working Hoosiers. So I want to see our legislature focusing on issues that are going to make a more meaningful impact in these people's lives.
Thank you. Mr. Deery.
For me, it's not a question of do you support it, because it's the law of the land now. It's a question of would you support repealing it, and the answer to that is absolutely no. I would like to see the law implemented and carried and done as wisely and as effective as we can, and I appreciate that after the governor signed it, that the police force indicated that they were eager to do so. This is an issue that has split the party. As I talk to people in different parts of the district, I hear all sides of it. So what I'm focused on is trying to unite the party for bigger and other fights that are coming ahead. And so I don't think that's a fight that we need to have repealing it. I think that we need to continue and let it take its course. But what I do want to say is anytime there's a loss of liberty, it comes usually because citizens don't accompany that with an increase in personal responsibility. So here in Indiana, we now have the right restored to us to carry constitutional carry. If that's going to disappear someday, it's going to be because we as Hoosiers are not smart about it. It's because somebody is going and carrying a gun and without carrying the personal responsibility that comes with that. So I encourage all Hoosiers, if you're going to carry, take an NRA training course, go to the range and be capable and effective with what you're doing. If there's somebody that is mentally unstable, be concerned with that. So let's make sure that we implement this in a way so that we don't one day find ourselves losing that right again.
Thank you. Ms. Copenhaver.
So we either have constitutional rights or we don't. Constitutional carry is a right. We have the right to defend ourselves. We have the right to keep and bear arms to defend ourselves. I'm thankful that they recognized our constitutional right. When our law enforcement trains, they train as though everybody they stop or they come in contact with is armed. And so it's no different. So why would we restrict our constitutional rights and not pass constitutional carry? And I would hope to shout, we don't repeal our Constitution, good golly. And so it doesn't matter what I'm wearing, I'm always carrying because I believe in my right to carry and to defend myself if I need to.
Thank you. Thank you, panelists. It is now time for closing remarks. We will begin with Mr. Webster.
Okay, so like I said in my opening remarks, you know, I'm a husband, I'm a father, I'm a grandfather. Like many of you, I'm a concerned citizen. I do not have a government knows best attitude. In my job, you know, as sales and marketing, I travel the district. I understand the district from one-on-one conversations all day long as I travel. I didn't start understanding the district when I started running for this position, this seat. I travel this district regularly. I'm from Rockville, but I'm in Tippecanoe County for my job 3 or 4 times a week. So, and in the other counties as well. So, you know, I'll always defend as if I'm blessed with the opportunity from the voters, if the voters will support me, I will always fight to defend families. I will always fight to defend life. It'll always be my goal to keep taxes as low as possible. And I encourage everybody to work a poll. You know, that's an opportunity to get involved with the election process. Please visit our website, webstersenate.com, and follow our campaign. I would appreciate any support from the voters that they're willing to provide with us. We have a lot of challenges with our federal government. That's one of my greatest concerns is the federal government overreach. But hey, look, there's good news here, you know. It's not all doom and gloom. You know, we as Americans can get involved, and we can make it better. We can always make Indiana better. We can make America greater, right? So thank you, and for all that was involved tonight, thank you for allowing us to be here and allowing us the opportunity.
Thank you. Mr. Beaver.
During my youth, I made 2 mission trips to Thailand. I volunteered in orphanages and leper colonies. I had the chance to touch and hold some of the sickest, poorest, most broken people in our world, and it ruined me. I came home and was totally changed. Nothing would ever look the same for me again. I became intimately aware of the pain and suffering experienced by people, often silently, across our country, our state, my town, even right next to me. And I just couldn't live the rest of my life pretending I didn't see it. It's taken me a number of years to reach the decision. A lot of thought, a lot of prayer, a lot of sitting up awake at night, thinking, what am I going to do? How am I going to help people? How am I going to help hurting people? And this district is full of them, full of people who have long since given up any hope that someone's going to come along and knock on their door and say, what do you need? How can I help you? What are your hopes? What are your dreams? What are your aspirations for the future? Bridging the divide is my campaign slogan. The first divide I ever wanted to bridge was with the person nearest to me who felt alone. And our state has got a lot of people that we need to show you're not alone. Someone sees you, someone hears you, and someone cares. We can bridge the divide for someone together with hope and not hate. I'm asking for your support. Help me to bridge that divide for the people in State Senate District 23. I'm Christian Beaver. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Deery.
For the last 10 years, I've had the honor to be a part of the leadership team of Purdue University that has helped to make that university one of the most innovative in the country and a major driver of jobs in our state. For the last 9.5 or so, I've been honored to be mentored by our former governor, somebody who, without exaggeration, is on a list of the world's 50th greatest leaders. And I would never put myself at that level, but I've had the ability to work with and learn from somebody who knows a little something about effective conservative leadership, and I have indeed learned a little something. And that matters in this race because, as you heard, every one of us, really there's not that much difference between us on the issues. What's really going to distinguish us as we go forward and to determine whether we're effective senators is the assets that we bring in terms of our qualifications, our training, our experience, and our leadership. As a state senator, I will take those skills and those abilities and to fight for Indiana and for what's best. I will always be truthful. I will always tell you the truth, even when it makes you mad. I will be accurate. I will take time to understand the facts and care about public policy and not just throw out anything for my own sake or for my own attention. I will be strategic in picking the fights, when we fight them, the way we fight them, in order to be able to advance the conservative movement in the best way forward. And most of all, because of those things, I'll be bold. I'll aim high in defending life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness in every way that I can. The country, in many ways, is drifting left, and Indiana could too, if we don't provide an alternative of a new generation of strong, effective, responsible conservative leadership. And I believe that I'm the most qualified candidate and capable to do that. I'm asking for your vote and to help me do it. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Copenhaver.
If I thought that one of my opponents would represent me and our district the way I want to be represented, I would gracefully bow out and get behind one of them. I used to think it was God, family, and country. I've learned that it is God, country, and family. Because if it's not God first, we don't really have anything, because we need to acknowledge Him, and He will direct our paths. The second thing is country. If we don't have a free country based on the founding principles that our founding fathers established, then we don't have a country and freedom to raise our families in. And so I am running for state senate to represent us and our district. If I don't know the answers, I'm not going to tell you I know. I'm going to do the research. I have already been endorsed by over 46 county clerks, which are my peers that I have worked with over the last 6 years, and a lot of them only over the last couple of years. I am more than qualified to represent us and to represent us well. And so I am asking for your support on May 3rd to vote for me, Paula Copenhaver. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, candidates. Thank you, panelists. And thank you all for coming out tonight. Get out and vote. Have a great evening.